This is a completely different world compared to the throbbing Egyptian capital. It's serene with a much slower pace, really the kind of place that calls out to you to relax and recharge in this remote desert wilderness. That's especially true of where I'm staying, which is on Elephantine Island in the middle of the Nile River, accessible only by ferry. It feels like a world unto itself, removed somewhat from traditional Egyptian culture. That's because almost all the people on this island are Nubian, the indigenous African people who for centuries have lived along the upper Nile in Sudan and southern Egypt, and who trace their origins as a people back to as far as 2000 BC. Today, the city of Aswan is about half and half traditional Egyptian and native Nubian, which gives the place an exotic air much different than what one encounters in the rest of Egypt. As soon as you get off the ferry on the city side, it's a very different vibe. Very busy, the streets teeming with people, buses and tuk-tuks. A bit chaotic for sure.
A great place to take in the view from the city side of Aswan is also one of its most pleasant, Ferry Garden on a bluff top overlooking the Nile.
This garden has been wisely preserved as a city park, even though it's actually a historic site that was once the property of the royal family of Egypt. In fact, it was established as a palace, or the site of a palace, by relatives of former Sultan or King Muhammad Ali.
That's the same Muhammad Ali who ruled Egypt for the first half of the 19th century and whose tomb is in one of Cairo's most prominent mosques.
The palace is gone, but the garden remains, renamed as a public park in 1944. And it's one of the best places in all of Aswan to look down on the river and Elephantine Island on its west side.
For me, it's also a great place to engage with locals, including Philae, a grandmother who insisted that I meet her daughter and 3 grandchildren.
This park is a real jewel, especially if you're spending time walking around the city or up and down the corniche above the river. Just keep walking to the south of the corniche to where you see the large rocks, and you'll be here. A great place. I've come just a short walk from the ferry landing where I get to my own hotel to show you perhaps the city's finest historical hotel, the Old Cataract Hotel, where guests over the years have included movie stars and politicians. This elegant crescent-shaped hotel with its beautiful gardens is where the late great Agatha Christie holed up for a year in the 1930s to write one of her most famous murder mysteries, Death on the Nile. It's a pretty pricey place to stay, as you might imagine, but if you're a guest here, you can view both the desk from the suite where she did much of her writing, as well as a rocking chair that she's said to have used to kick back after a long day's work. The connection between Agatha Christie and Aswan came about serendipitously, apparently. She and her husband were on a Nile cruise aboard the SS Sudan, which was built for Egyptian royalty back in the 1880s. It is said that Christie began to formulate the idea for the 1937 novel while on board the cruise. And then, for authenticity's sake, she came here with her husband and moved into the hotel to do the writing. I don't know what it costs to stay here as I speak to you, but after they told me there was a fee for outsiders merely to enter the lobby, I didn't bother to ask. Among the boats moored on the shores of the Nile here, it's very picturesque, idyllic even, but it obscures the relative poverty of the Nubians who live on this island, with very few, if any, paved streets. Yet people here are very gracious, very friendly, and very busy, as this gentleman beside me is now tending to his boat. Hello. He looks as though he's done that for a while, using that hatchet-like instrument to remove a thin layer of wood, as if it were an automated machine. One of the things that has surprised me about the Nile here, which I wasn't expecting, is the clarity of the water. You can look into it at close range and see that it's clean here, and cold and flowing very nicely, as opposed to the coffee-colored lower Nile. There's a rather touristic Nubian village on this island, and a second Nubian village elsewhere in Aswan, but it seems rather superfluous to go to either one, when in reality, if you're walking on Elephantine Island, as I am, you're in a Nubian village. Streets on this island bear a similar characteristic as those you would see elsewhere in the Arab world, except for one thing. Hello, how are you guys? I'm from the US. How are you?
Where are you from?
The US. America.
America.
Yeah. I was saying that the alleyways here do have a distinct difference in that there's less orientation. There's certainly less stonework, as most of the alleyways, along with the streets, are simply dirt. And in the case of the alleyways, they've been carefully... hello. Yeah. And in the case of the alleyways here, they're all neatly brushed. I don't know exactly where I am. No one could in this maze of alleyways. But I know one thing. I'm getting closer and closer to a mosque, which I see that I'm passing. I just glanced to the side door and saw worshipers inside praying. Nubians are overwhelmingly Muslim. Historically, they converted to Islam. Many of them were Christians before in ancient times. And there are Coptic Christian churches even here in Aswan, but the vast majority of the Nubians do proclaim themselves to be Muslim. In ancient times, Nubia was a nation until the Assyrians under King Sennacherib conquered Egypt and largely drove them out in the 7th century BC. In modern times, they've suffered further indignity with the construction of the High Aswan Dam in the 1960s, which required not only the removal of Nubian villages, but left many of their historical monuments submerged under Lake Nasser. Every so often as you walk here, you see public basins on the sides of buildings, and you see public bathhouses. I've seen one already where people can go in and bathe themselves, take a shower, or just wash their hands, which of course implies that perhaps not all of the homes here have indoor plumbing. All the time I've been walking around so far, it's just been a while, I've encountered 0 tourists. You are away from the madding crowd. I'm about to share a boat ride to a very special place, which I will tell you about once I board, with my camera in hand and not wanting to fall and spill into the water. Well, the place that we're headed is the Aswan Botanical Garden. And there is no ferry from Elephantine Island to the Botanical Garden. But if you walk over to the west side of the island, there are usually boats hanging around, and someone will offer to take you for a price. And I've teamed up with a young French couple and their 2 children to come across to this beautiful spot. You could see that dam or no dam behind us. This river can be treacherous and always has been, as exhibited by these huge rocks that we're passing, and you see them up and down this part of the Nile. This island is Kitchener's Island, named for the famed Lord Horatio Kitchener. In 1892, he was given a portion of this island in recognition of his service in Egypt. And Kitchener was a man devoted to gardening, as it turns out. And he created a beautiful garden on a portion of his landholding here. And that's where we are today. And even though it's called the Aswan Botanical Garden now, it was really the Botanical Garden which belonged to Kitchener. He was able to bring in plants from all over the world, India to the farthest parts of Asia, from wherever plants would be located in a similar climate. This is a well-maintained botanical garden, and it's truly an oasis in what would otherwise be more hot, barren land. I don't know that I've ever been to a place with such dramatic contrast. As you can see all around me is just beautiful, lush gardens with exotic plants and trees. And just across the way, on the west bank of the Nile, away from this island, is sand. You think of all of the moments in history involving untold numbers of people over different epochs, different civilizations, from the great pharaohs, Cleopatra, Napoleon, so many that left their mark on this river. Or more appropriately, I should say, so many for whom the river left its mark on them. It's the time of day when people here gravitate to the river, and no wonder, it's beautiful. Even if you can't walk 50 feet without a tout offering you a ride on a horse-drawn carriage or a felucca. But hey, that's small price to pay for being part of the human pageant here. I think I'll turn off the camera and linger a bit. See you next time as the series continues from Egypt.